Hello, everyone. You are listening to the C Squared podcast with Corey, Curtis, and our co host, Holly. She is here today with us. So she's here to keep us in check because let's face it, Holly is the brains behind this operation. Secretly, she's the puppet master.
Yep.
And our other special guest today, we have Liam from Cancer Bats back again. And I just want to say, one, thank you to Holly for putting up with our shenanigans all the time. And Liam, thank you for braving this podcast again.
Yeah, round two. Thanks for having me on the show again.
Obviously, we didn't terrify you too bad. And for anybody who missed the last podcast with you on it, you want to just give just a quick little who you are, because really they should have listened to it. Dang it.
Oh, yeah. I thought
But
you
if
meant
you
like recap the last podcast. So I was like, whoa, you blew it. We really got into some great stuff. But my name's Liam. I sing in a hardcore band called Cancer Bats from Canada. And yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. And if you didn't listen to the other podcast with Liam and you want to know more about him, just go listen to the other podcasts.
Listen to the other podcast.
Look up his band, listen to his music, immerse yourself in the Cancer Bats. But today we are going to be going over merch, how to differentiate your band with your merch, how to get cool merch ideas, and all sorts of fun. Because I'm looking at your merch right now, at least in your North American store, and it looks like you guys do a lot of fun stuff. You've got some patches, you've got a skateboard going on, you've got a bunch of shirts, super awesome vinyl. You've got some great stuff going on. And so first, I just want to start with, and you have stuff for kids. Like, that's awesome.
We're covering all bases.
Yeah. So how do you guys, when you're planning your merch, how do you begin the brainstorming process of what you want to do and what you want to try?
I mean, I think the big, I guess, like merch as the vast, like an intro to merch, maybe is like maybe a better place to start for like people. Because I think with Cancer Bats, or maybe I'll tell you where I was coming at it from being a hardcore band. Basically merch in the hardcore scene is everything. Like your independent bands, you're touring on, you know, really limited budgets, you're playing for maybe $50. So the idea of selling t-shirts and all of that stuff is like basically how you're gonna like make life on the road exist. I feel like selling t-shirts and CDs and cassettes and anything you can think of is kind of like basically the way that we all like made our bands work from the get-go in that scene. It was like, okay, we're gonna sell t-shirts, and then with those t-shirts we can maybe like record a demo, and like we can maybe like then afford gas to like get to the next show, so like nothing's out of pocket. So I feel like in the hardcore scene it like all came down to like your merch as like basically your whole existence.
So you really don't have a choice but to be creative and come up with new things.
Yeah, and I feel like it was kind of part of the scene too. Like, you know, back in the day you would always be getting pins and patches and, you know, shirts and all that kind of stuff like from the bands that you liked also. So that was like a huge part of like being a part of that scene, was the whole like merch end of things.
I got a quick question just kind of as a sort of a follow-up on that. So now, is there a way that you kind of test your merch ideas first before you kind of mass produce them?
Yeah, I definitely like would do, like if it was like a new design or something that I was like trying to like maybe like test out, because for us like we tour, you know, pretty broad, so I can like see if a design does well on like a short run of shows. So maybe I only buy 50 of them out the gate, or like maybe I only buy 100 if I'm like unsure if something's gonna like do really well. And then if it proves itself like, oh, people were really into this design, then that's like what I'll keep printing when we go to England, and then when we go to Europe, and then when we go to Australia. It's like, oh, okay, this one did really well, so I'll try this. So I like having also like, for me, like I think about like Cancer Bats is a pretty broad band.
Yeah.
You know, we have like fans that are super into metal. We also have kids that are into hardcore. We also have like kids that are into punk. And there's like a lot of like women and men and like, you know, different kind of like people are all together at that show. So I like to try and think of like, I don't want to just have one style of merch. I
Mhm.
want to try and have something that every single person at the show can like be stoked on and like go home with, you know? So that I have like across the board with like designs, but also with like the patches and like we do bandanas, we do kind of like all of that stuff. Cause I also want to like make sure that even if you only have $5, you know
Mhm.
what I mean? Like you can buy a patch or you can buy something cool. And not just like the capitalist in me, but also for like, I remember being that like broke kid
Yeah.
who only had like, you know, I took like the Greyhound bus into Toronto to go see the band. And I was like, what $1 patches do you have? You know,
Yeah.
like, cause that was all I had, you know, I want to save $2 for a veggie dog before I get back on the bus.
Fair enough.
So
Well, just
that like when I look at like merch, I kind of think of it from that perspective too. Like when I was like the kid who like couldn't afford the things.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean that's the thing too. I like having like some fun, different kind of stuff, as well as the traditional, like you have a black t-shirt and it looks really metal. And you're like, okay, maybe I'll also do like a fun yellow shirt with like, you know, a print or like
Underappreciated color in metal.
I hate
yeah,
it.
like just kind of like throwing it into the mix.
I hate.
Yeah.
I don't.
I had a question. So on testing merch and testing merch ideas, how do you feel about print on demand? That's becoming more and more popular.
I think that stuff's cool, and I think it definitely like works when a band has like a bit more of like, I want to say like a limited budget, but I also think sometimes it's good to just like commit to things. Like merch is like a little bit of a gamble. You
Mhm.
know what I mean? Because you have to like buy all the shirts and you have to kind of like go for it and like really like commit to like buying something. But then when you do that, when you buy like 100 shirts, you have a better margin. You get a better deal on those shirts.
Yeah.
So if you're only like kind of like half in, and that kind of like to me also means you have to be really confident in the design that you're doing. So like if you have like a kick-ass design that you know you're like, man, this is the best, like I know this is gonna like do super well, then that's when you can like go in and like make like 100 of them or maybe print 500 of them. Cause then you get like a way better deal and then you can like sell them. Curtis?
Yes, I have a question to follow up on. So you just mentioned that you're going to go all in on the merch, basically, right? A design. So how does that kind of force you to sell something then, if you get what I mean? Like, does it put like a,
Oh yeah, because that's the other side that I think coming from the hardcore end of things,
yeah,
like I then am also like at merch, and especially when our band was starting,
yeah,
I was like hustling merch because it was like, okay, we're in Europe and we're only getting paid $100 a show. Like
yeah,
I have to sell this merch so that we can like, you know, pay off the flights that we booked.
yeah,
So like for me, it was like also, yeah, I would take that gamble on myself because I'd be like, oh, I'm gonna make sure I like talk to every kid at this Rise Against show and like make friends and like sell merch and like make sure I sell all these shirts. Cause I also would have like this kind of like all of the expenses were looming on whether
yeah,
or not we could like sell t-shirts.
yeah,
So for me, I was like, okay, I'm at that merch stand like directly from stage, like covered in sweat,
yeah.
like selling shirts. Like, you want me to sign something? Like, I am there for it.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
2007, you have a digital camera.
Mhm.
Let's take a MySpace selfie.
That's awesome. So just one last follow-up on there, and I'm gonna let Holly ask a question because we haven't asked her yet. So, did that kind of come naturally to you to sell, or did you have to learn how to do it? Because a lot of bands are shy and they won't do that. So I'm curious how you kind of learned how to do that.
I mean, I definitely like grew up working like retail. So I like worked in skate shops. I worked in snowboard shops.
I
I
get
was
it.
like good at like selling stuff
I-
from when I was like 16 years old. And then
Yeah.
I actually did merch for bands. So I would like, because I wanted to go on tour, I was just like, oh, I could like go and do merch. And originally I was doing merch for Scott's metal band At the Mercy of Inspiration.
Mhm.
That, and so I would like tour with them, and like kind of that's how I like started, learning the merch game.
Nice. Okay, that's interesting. Holly, we'll let you ask a question since we've hogged it.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm kind of
British
interested. Oh,
So polite.
Yeah.
oh, I know. But it kind of following on, how do you find like selling merch outside of a show environment? Because obviously, like the past year, there's been no shows on or very little, so everyone's just trying to do it online. But it feels like to me that everyone's just sort of screaming into the void, and no one's necessarily getting heard that much.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely find that side of things like interesting, because for Cancer Bats, like we are such like a live like merch kind of like band. So like everyone knows that they can buy t-shirts from us in person, like at the show. So it did make this last year like a little interesting. Honestly, we like didn't really, I think because we like already kind of knew that we were going to take time off for the pandemic to happen. We also weren't in this like position where a lot of bands had like, they had like a tour's worth of merch that they had already bought, that they had all these like expenses. So I felt like there was a lot of people who shifted to online, and like you said, they were like literally like desperate to like try and like get out of the like the deficit that they were in. Whereas we were kind of like, oh, okay, we did like an EP and we made a shirt for it, but that was like for charity. So it kind of like made the pressure of like pivoting to becoming like an online band like a little less crucial for us. But I will say, like, on the flip side of that, I also run a clothing brand as like my other business that I do. So I have like this, motorcycle related clothing brand called Treadwell that I like design like actual like jackets and vests and pants, and I make t-shirts and hats and all this stuff. So in the downtime that we had, I kind of just like, for me personally, like really focused on the internet, because I couldn't go to motorcycle shows and I couldn't like just like show up to do sales anywhere. So I will say on the other side, I learned how to like scream into the void, I guess, and like get a little bit better. So on the Cancer Bat side, like we kind of just, it was like business as usual. Whereas like for, everybody's kind of like side hustles, that's where like more of the internet stuff kind of happened. If that answers the question, sorry.
I want to follow this up, Liam. Just out of curiosity. So now you're pretty much anytime we ever see you or have ever seen a picture of you or anything like that, you always got your own stuff on as
Oh yeah.
like, is that because you're trying to keep it like, so is that like is that like planned, like you want to have everything like where it's always showing the clothes or what?
I don't know if it's as planned now as much as it's like kind of in this like sort of like casual way now that I'm doing it. Because I think like it's when you're in a band, unless you're like Jason Newsted, like you're not really supposed to wear your own band shirt.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that's kind of like, I don't know, it's like depends who can like pull it off.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I know. It depends.
But I remember being at an airport in Calgary, and there was this woman who was there, who we were like taking a shuttle together, and we were chatting because she had all of these like bags, like garment bags with her. And I was like, oh, like you're obviously doing like clothing stuff. Like I do clothing stuff as well. And she was like, oh, cool. Yeah. Like I make these coats and like we're here in the mountains to go do a photo shoot. And we're like this brand from Sweden. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. And she was like, what's your stuff? And she was looking at what I was wearing. And I was like, oh, I'm not wearing any of my stuff. And she was just like, you're blowing it. And
Really?
it like really dawned on me that I was like, oh yeah, this is like different from like being in a band and like wearing my own, like Metallica shirt.
Yeah.
Like that side of things, like you can be like, I'm in Cancer Bats, and then someone can Google it. Whereas like in sort of like fashion, like a lot of the stuff, like this is obviously like a bit more branded, but like the jackets and things that I have are literally just like, they look like a jean jacket. They just like look like a Carhartt vest. So that sort of like side of my brain was just like, oh yeah, I should be wearing this stuff like all the time, because
Yeah.
I obviously want to make it for like a piece that's missing in my own life.
Yeah.
So on the fashion side of things, like that was like kind of like where the brand came from, was that I was like, I want more positive, motorcycling gear. I felt like all the motorcycling gear was like really negative, and
Yeah.
like I was like, oh, I can have like a positive spin on these things. And then I was like, I could make these cool coats that like fit different than a Levi's jacket, that fit more
Yeah.
like a work coat that like I can't buy. So that sort of like mentality sort of shifted. So I think sometimes I like want to like plan it, and then other times I'm like, maybe I'll like wear some different stuff. Like on stage, when Treadwell was first starting, like my guys were really encouraging and being like, wear a Treadwell shirt. Like I'll wear a Treadwell shirt where I play drums, like that kind of stuff. And then after a certain point, I was like, oh, this company's going, so I don't want to just always be wearing Treadwell like in every Cancer Bats shoot or every Cancer Bats like thing.
Yeah.
But now it's really cute, because when we show up to do photos or when we play a show, usually like Mike or Jay is like wearing a Treadwell thing. So it's pretty cool.
I got one more follow up before I let one of the girls talk. Is so how much merch do you kind of like give away to other bands or people as kind of like a promotional type thing, if at all?
That was a huge thing with the start of the band. Was that I immediately was like, I have to like set aside X number of shirts to give to bands.
Yes.
Like I was like, I want a Cancer Bats shirt on the cover of like Alternative Press. I want a Cancer Bats shirt. Like that was like my way in. Was like George from Alexis on Fire. I mean, he took it upon himself, but he was just like, oh, Cancer Bats, sick. This is the shirt I'm wearing every single day on stage. And so it was like, kids are opening up like Kerrang magazine, and you see a Cancer Bats shirt on like George from Alexis, or like Andrew from Comeback Kid, or like, like the dudes in Silverstein, or like one of the guys from A Day to Remember. I remember like rocked one of our shirts like in like a photo shoot. And I was like, yes, this is like the payoff of like just like always kind of like doing merch trades and like always like kind of like hooking up your friends. But I think also like not doing it, like I wasn't just like mailing my shirts to like Hatebreed because I thought they were cool. Like it was like also had to be like kind of genuine. Like they were all just my friends who like wanted to have the thing. So I feel like there's a little bit of that too. That also is part of like the hardcore, community. Like I really, want to like rep my friends' bands, or like wear a brand of a thing when you're doing like a show. And even when I look back, like there's like right now, like tons of people are reposting like photos from festivals. And it's like, oh yeah, in 2012, I was wearing a While She Sleeps shirt on the main stage of Ladies in Reading. I'm like, that gets me stoked. You know what I mean? Like those guys are still like my good homies. Like that kind of stuff I feel like is like part of that hardcore community.
I agree. And I know personally, I've looked at bands just from seeing shirts and listening to them. It does work. Corey, you look like you want to say something.
I was just going to say that, I mean, not only is it helpful for spreading your word, but it helps the fans of those other bands get to know those bands more because,
Yep.
you know, if it's an older band shirt that they're wearing, then you learn their influences and what they like to listen to. And if it's a newer band shirt, like Curtis just said, it encourages people to go look up
Yep.
that band. And I mean, I always like to look and see what other bands, the band that I'm watching, what their shirts are, and go and see what they're listening to, because as a fan specifically, I mean, it helps, it just continues to bridge that gap between the fan and the band.
Yeah. And I think also like it's cool to kind of like communicate in this subtle way that you're like into other stuff.
Yeah.
Like I remember seeing guys from hardcore bands like wearing like Cat Power shirts. And you're like, oh, that's so sick. Like I like Cat Power too, even though we all also listen to like the most crushing hardcore. It's like, yeah, you have like a very musical taste.
Yeah.
Which I think like kind of speaks more than just wearing, you know, like the Black Flag shirt, you know, that everyone else has.
Yeah.
But I think again, sort of back to what I was saying, this is like my other point that I was thinking of, is that like when you have a design that you again know is like the coolest shirt ever, like that's when you're like, man, if you wear this, it'll also like you have that confidence to give that shirt to someone to be like, this is cool.
Yeah.
You know, like I know I made a sick shirt and that you will also look cool if you wear it. I don't know, it feels corny saying that, but I feel like it's kind of like what we were talking about before, like where the art becomes as important as the music, like where like everything that you're doing is like also in part of this, like you're not just putting your name on a shirt because you want to make money.
Yep.
You're like making a design because that's also one of your interests and because you like want to make cool shit in general.
Yep.
Mhm.
100%. Holly, you want to go next?
Yeah, if that's all right. I'm
Yes.
quite interested sort of along like the design lines of things. Do you notice if like album artwork or band logos does better than say specifically designed art pieces just for a particular merch item?
Like I'm maybe just to understand like
Mhm.
like when there's like something that's just like randomly made or like something that has to tie in with the whole record.
Something that's maybe just sort of a bit, yeah, maybe more random. So it's just like it's a really cool piece of artwork, but it doesn't necessarily relate to say the latest release or something like that.
Yeah, I think I'm with that. Like I like kind of like what I was saying before, like where you have like the different, like I like having like 4 or 5 like very different styles of merch. So it's like I like the album specific one because that exists in like a time and place. Like you're just like, oh man, I made this one for this record. Everyone knows it's from the DSOL tour. Maybe it even has dates on the back. And there's like X people that love that. But then I'm also with it to like have just like something that exists on its own and is just like very, you know, like unspecific to either the tour or the album or anything. I'll say too, for like a band, you also like then aren't at the risk. Like if you put album art or like dates, you're kind of stuck with like selling those shirts for that like 2 years
Yeah.
that you're touring that record or for like that specific. Some people like dates from like a tour that they weren't on for some reason. They're like, I feel like if you bring like a Canadian shirt to Germany, there's like some people who think that's really cool. But I also think like the way that you can look at merch too is like, as long as it doesn't go moldy, like as long as it's not in like a wet garage, like you can sell that shirt for as long as you're a band, maybe even longer, because if your band breaks up, you could still sell those shirts. So that's where I kind of think sometimes of like the investment. Like if you have like a really sick design, like if I could have like just like the original bat flock Cancer Bats logo, like if I could have printed 1,000 of those and like made the price a lot better, like I just think, oh, in hindsight, I would have like actually been able to like make a better margin on those shirts and like sell more of those shirts. But it's like at the time you kind of don't think of those, or you don't have money to make like $1,000 shirt.
But so with the pricing, how do you kind of figure out the pricing so that way you don't lose money, because a lot of bands also have this problem where they underprice the merch.
Yeah, that's my thing, is that like a big part is like understanding screen printing too. So for
Cool.
us, like if you look at a lot of Cancer Bats designs, especially like the real like, you know, good ones, we always would make sure that we just did a really good solid design that could be printed as one color.
Cool.
Because you're also like, oh, I'm gonna design this thing and it's gonna look really rad, and then I can just print a white print on a black t-shirt, and it's just as valuable because the design's really cool than some like 5-color shirt, you know, that like someone else has that you're really only able to sell for like the same amount. So you're like, okay, I'm gonna sell this shirt for $20. Or back in the day, we were selling shirts for like 10 pounds or like $15 in Canada. That was like the punk rock price. So I was
miss
like,
those days.
okay. I was like, I gotta make this shirt so it only costs like X amount. And
Yeah.
that's when I started like learning the volume sort of stuff. Like I was like, oh, okay, if I go to a t-shirt place, they'll cut me a deal if I buy 300 black shirts. So I'll buy 300 blank shirts and then I'll bring that to the screen printer, and then I'll get one color print on the front of them. And then that's like, you know, now this shirt only costs $3.
Fair enough. Okay, so actually I'm gonna let Corey ask the next question because we haven't let her talk in a bit.
No, I was just going to ask. So I know we've put a ton of focus on shirts, but how would you recommend bands branch out into merch that isn't your typical, you know, shirts and patches? That is the, you know, the norm. Because I noticed you guys have a skateboard, which is freaking epic.
Yeah.
And then I've seen some bands doing mugs. I've seen, you know, I mean, Kiss is known for doing literally everything. So how would you recommend bands explore the more unique side of merch and figure out what really works with their audience? Because I mean, ordering in volume for skateboards had to be difficult. So how did you even test that one, or did you just run with it on gut feeling?
I just ran with it with the skateboard one. Skateboard
Mhm.
one's tricky because it's like more like, it's almost in the poster like artwork kind of side, because most people want the skateboard to like hang on their wall. So it's like a weird, like no one's actually skating the decks, so they don't actually have to be like as functional as you kind of think. Like I think sometimes I'm the only one who's skating the decks because I can just take a couple and skate them. But yeah, I think the biggest thing honestly is like, from me being at merch, I kind of like have a perfect like way to interact with everybody and like see who's coming to the show. You know what I mean? Like if you have tons of your fans that are also wearing like Anti-Hero and like Thrasher shirts and like Skull Skates hoodies, you're like, oh, when I go to the West Coast, like there's tons of people who are involved in skate culture.
Mhm.
So you're kind of just like, for me, like I'm like interacting with and like learning, you know, what people are into by just like hanging out with them and like
Mhm.
being around that. So it's sort of like Cancer Bats, like we made mugs because I love coffee, and I
Mhm.
kind of like had that as like a thing. But like I've seen some other bands that are like super into weed, and they like know that their fans are also super into weed, where they make like grinders or they make like pipes or like stuff like that. And like that's like a killer, you know, part of like your interaction, because like you're kind of like then having like a thing that you and your fans can kind of bond over, because you're like, you're really into weed, you're this much into weed that you want to make like a grinder. Like I'm that into weed, you know what I mean? And like then you have like people are so stoked like on those things. So I think with some of the like outside ideas, it's like, yeah, kind of like know who your fans are, and like having more of that interaction again comes from just like being at merch every night, like
Yeah.
hanging out. And I also like to see what other people are like wearing.
Mhm.
Like I find that's the big thing, because like everywhere or every like kind of place that you play has its own sort of style has its own, like, some people, we used to laugh about this, like, in Southern Ontario, you would make size small t-shirts in the early 2000s. Everyone wanted to wear like little tiny shirts. All the guys wore size small or like extra small so you could show off your like studded belts. And then we would drive to the east coast of Canada, and like going through Quebec, like it would be like selling smalls, and then we would get to like New Brunswick and it was like size large, size XL, like back to baggy pants. And it was like, oh, like we have way too many smalls now. Like, okay, next time we come back, like in 3 months or 6 months, I'm going to make sure I have like large, XL, 2XL, 3XL, you know? And it's like knowing those things and kind of like keeping track of that, I think is, again, like where you're sort of successful. Like, and that I feel like only comes from trial and error or asking other bands.
So, okay, so, but like, let's say that you did, so like you do that, you go to New Brunswick or whatever, you don't have the right merch. What do you do to handle that, like to still make sales? Is there a way?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to scramble and like literally like find like, where can I print large shirts?
Fair.
You know, like maybe it's like ordering merch and you're like getting, because sometimes you do like a bad, you know, you think you're going to sell X number of hoodies and all of a sudden you play one show and everyone buys them. And you're like, okay, I've got like 10 more days in this part of the country where people seem to love hoodies. Like I should just like, again, that gamble comes in where you're like, I'm going to order a bunch of hoodies and get them like shipped to my next show or to like whatever. It's Friday night and I'm going to like sell out of merch. Okay, I need to like order merch right now and get it sent to me for Monday. So I can like continue to like, I would say, if I can stress this more, it's always worth it to figure out making more merch.
Yeah.
The amount of bands that I meet like on sorry, someone's knocking on my door. The amount of bands that I meet like who are on tour and they're like, oh yeah, we're sold out, but we only have like 4 shows left. And you're like, dude, just make that merch.
Yeah.
Even if it's just like the most random like design you can get done that's a single color, maybe if it's not the specific like t-shirt that you want, it's always better to just have shirts or have like the thing than to just be like, oh well, you can get it next time, like glad you like the set. I'm always like, it's just like a missed opportunity.
Yeah, that makes sense. Holly, you want to ask a final question? We got 2 more we can do. Do you need to answer, William?
Let me just double check this. Hold on. Give me 2 seconds.
Here, I'm going to pause it for a second. Hold on. 3.
Yeah, so following on, I'd be interested to know, like, what you think the most, well, I'm going to say apart from t-shirts, what you think the most essential merch item is.
I would say kind of like the other big key thing is like I call it the table game. So like you have the t-shirts, those are an obvious one, but then what's all the like extra things on the table? Like I was saying, like the patch, like we make like patches, we make like so much money off of patches, and they're all just like, it's not just like having one, it's like we have like 7 or 8 designs that we just like have these patches made. And then people are like, oh, sick, I'm also going to buy this patch and this bandana and like a keychain, a toothbrush, a pen, whatever, you know, maybe it's a 7-inch, maybe it's a cassette. Like it's all those like little things that I feel like add up to like bigger things. And that's also the thing that like, again, long game, like if you make 1,000 patches, it doesn't matter how long it takes to like sell them. Because again, it's like so much cheaper to make like 1,000 of them and then to like slowly sell them at like $5 a piece, you know, than to be like, maybe we can like make 20. And then you're like, I'll sell them for, I think I have to sell them for $8 because we only made 20. And you're like, that's not cool. You don't want to pay $8 for that. Yeah. Like just make a bunch and then you can sell them for like the price that you'd actually want to buy them for.
Holly, did you have a follow-up on that before I ask my final?
No. You go ahead.
Okay, so my question is, what would be a unique merch idea that a band that you think would work that most bands have never tried? Sorry.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we've done a lot. I
Yeah.
think like again, like having like a cool idea and like just going with it, I think is the like most important. Like for Cancer Bats, like I was like super confident in making sunglasses, and I
Okay.
made like Ray-Ban looking
Yeah.
sunglasses with like white arms, and they said Cancer Bats on them.
Mhm.
And this was like early days of like ordering things from overseas.
Yep.
So I like asked a merch company for a contact, and I like made these sunglasses in China. And we had sunglasses. It took like a really long time again to sell through them all, but like people loved these sunglasses.
Good.
Like it was like such a cool hit. And again, like speaking of like kind of like the table game, like it was just so easy and like such a small little thing that we could like, oh, we'll bring 100 sunglasses with us to like the UK. Like I can just put that in my suitcase. You know what I mean? Like it's not a big bulky thing, but it was just like a unique kind of like cool thing that like stood out to people. So I feel like it's like those kind of ideas, like being like, oh yeah, nobody's doing this. Like maybe I should do this. Like that's like a, instead of just being like, oh, that band's selling koozies, like I'm gonna sell a beer koozie, you know, like that's a cool idea. You're like, yeah, but like you could also look at it and be like, man, I'm gonna make something that's like unique. Like I remember actually a metal band made flip-flops.
Yep. I think I
And
remember
they
that.
had like,
What?
there was like this band Acacia Strain made flip-flops. And I was
Okay.
like, Acacia Flame, like I was like, I have to have these.
Yep.
Like I didn't even care like as like a broke band dude. I was just like, no, I must spend the summer in Acacia Strain flip-flops.
Well,
I will pay full retail.
let me ask one final question. What is one merch idea that you thought was going to work that just fucking bombed, if anything?
There's always like, I feel like t-shirt designs.
Yeah.
Actually a huge one for Cancer Bats, and this was like early days,
Yep.
was we used to make these like gnarly shirts. Like we made a shirt that said the motherfucking Cancer Bats, and then on the back it said barfing our goddamn guts out. And it was a black print on a black shirt. Like it was just like so inside the box, or like outside of the box, like it was inside our own heads.
Yeah.
That obviously it bombed.
Oh,
and,
wow.
And we were like, we need to start making shirts like for our fans.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
we're about to go like on tour with like Alexis on Fire. Like we need to make some like basically like stuff that we would think is cool, but like stuff that like, you know, wouldn't like freak kids out.
Yeah.
And that was more the idea that we started getting into, like being like, you know, you need to make stuff that you're stoked on, but you need to make stuff for your fans. Because like, yeah, like you're not buying these shirts at the end of the day. Like it's the people that are showing up to these shows. And that's again, like kind of paying attention to like what merch like everyone at your shows is wearing.
Yeah.
Like if everyone likes like crazy all over print, like cool, wild stuff, then you're like, oh, okay, cool. Like maybe even like reach out to like the, you know, the person who made that Dimmu Borgir shirt and like see, like maybe they can make a cool shirt for you too, you know, because you're like just paying attention to what your fans are also into.
This is true. No, that's a very good point. Look to make stuff fans, not just for the band. Very
And
good.
kind of look at like, again, like what I was saying with like the skateboard sort of like, I noticed that like tons of our fans are like, you know, like 40-year-old skateboarders. So I'm like, okay, we're all kind of like drawing on the same influences. Like I can make, you know, merch that looks like that 90s kind of like thrasher, like that sort of era is like obviously what my fan base is going to like understand and pick up on.
Yeah.
But like if we had a bunch of 20-year-old kids who were, you know, into anime, and I'm trying to sell them like, you know, the complete opposite, it's like you've sort of missed your mark.
Mhm.
I'm like, I should have made an anime shirt.
Yep. No, I get it. I get it. Okay, Liam, we have to wrap up now because the time is getting short. Do you have any final words you want to say before we wrap up?
No, this is great. Thanks for having me on the podcast. I look
Thank-
forward to returning.
You will be returned.
Hint, hint.
Cough, cough. Party on, Corey. Party on, Holly.
Party on, everyone.